So we're going to keep on talking about the kingdom and what we've been looking at and what the kingdom is like. But again, today is not going to be one where it says the kingdom is like, but it's something that's related to that. And we're going to talk and look at the children. Jesus, people bring the children. In one it says they were babies, but they were children. They were youngsters that were coming up to see him. And what we're going to see is that, or what is it that is meant by the children coming to him? Now, historically, I read that women would bring newborns or young babies or young children to the rabbis. They would lay hands on them and bless them. And that was something that was traditional. And so we read in the Gospels at times where people called him rabbi because he was a teacher. Yeah. And so people would come and hear him, and that's how they understood him to be, many of them. And so women bringing him the children would not be unusual. They weren't bringing him necessarily because they thought he was necessarily the Messiah, but because of who they thought of him to be. And so we're going to look at children. And what is it that makes us, or makes children, the ones who would be likely to inherit the kingdom? And so first we want to start with some of these folks that would be listening to him. And in Matthew 5 and verse 20, he says, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." And people didn't have a real understanding of what the kingdom of heaven was. So he's trying to give them something to compare to. And in this, he's serious. I used to look at it and say he's just saying that to get at the Pharisees. But I think he's trying to give them a different plane of where the Pharisees are compared to where everybody else is. And the reason he's saying that is because the Pharisees have a lot of laws, a lot of traditions, a lot of things that you should be following. And if you don't exceed what they're doing, you're never going to make it in. And we'll see what exactly he's saying to them as we go on here. He says later on in Matthew 23, "But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you lock people out of the kingdom of heaven. For you do not go in yourselves, and when others are going in, you stop them." And so first he says, in the Sermon on the Mount, you need to exceed their righteousness, or you're not going to make it in. But then much later on, and in the chapter where he says, "But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites," many times, he says that they're locking people out. And they're locking people out by what they're doing. So the very things that you should exceed are the very things that are locking people out of the kingdom. And when other people are going in, by their own righteousness, they're stopping people from entering. So they're keeping everybody out. They're keeping themselves out. And they're keeping others out. And we'll see why as we go on. So in Romans chapter 2, which we looked at a little bit this morning, it says, "Therefore you have no excuse, whoever you are." And as I read this, I want you to see not judgment, but what is thought, what people think of themselves. "For in passing judgment on another, you condemn yourself, because you, the judge, are doing the very same things. You say, 'We know that God's judgment on those who do such things is in accordance with truth.' Do you imagine, whoever you are, that when you judge those who do such things and yet do them yourself, you will escape the judgment of God? Or do you despise the riches of his kindness and forbearance and patience? Do you not realize that God's kindness is meant to lead you to repentance, there's no particular. I mean, in Romans 1, he goes through many particulars of what they were doing. But in Romans 2 here, he's speaking specifically to the leaders and saying, you're telling people that they're not right or they're wrong, but you're doing the same exact things that they are. So, exceeding what the Pharisees are doing, the Pharisees are keeping people out by what they're doing, and the Pharisees think they're right. And it's in ignorance. It's not necessarily that they're setting out to stop people, but they honestly think we're doing the right thing. And that's why it says that the judgment to them is based on accordance of truth. And in their minds, they think, I'm not doing the same things. I've got it. I know where I'm going. And all these other poor people have no idea, and they need to be like me. And then Jesus is telling them, you're stopping people from getting in. I don't want to dwell on the Pharisees all morning. So we have one more scripture about the Pharisees. It says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and of the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup, so that the outside may become clean. And obviously here he's talking about in the heart, in the mind. You're clean on the outside, or you appear to be, but on the inside, you're not. You're very dirty. And I love the picture of the cups. Yeah. You know, it looks like restaurant, like you would get a cup of coffee in, right? And they're filthy, inside and out. What Jesus is saying is if you start on the inside, eventually that's going to work out and it'll be clean. You'll show clean because you are clean. You won't show clean when you're dirty inside out of self-righteousness, which is of works and of law and of the legal things. So we're going to be reading about the children from Matthew. But after he talks about the children, he talks about, or it's a young man comes, he's listening, and he asks Jesus, how can I be saved, or how can I get into the kingdom? And Jesus gives him some different laws, honoring your father and mother, and then talks about loving your neighbor, loving the Lord your God. And the man says, I've done all those things. And then Jesus tells him, and the man was rich, it says, all of your possessions, everything you have, sell it, give it to the poor and needy, and then you'll be ready. And it says, when the young man heard this word, he went away grieving, for he had many possessions. Then Jesus said to his disciples, truly I tell you, it will be hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. Again I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. When the disciples heard this, they were greatly astounded and said, then who can be saved? Who can be saved?
Yeah.
In their minds, nobody.
Yeah.
And I was reading this and I thought, the disciples weren't rich.
No.
They were fishermen. One of them, actually maybe two of them, could have been rich. Matthew, he was a tax collector, and we know what the tax collectors did.
Yeah.
They padded their income off the people's taxes.
Added the books.
And Luke, he was a doctor. So he probably made some good money, right? Now, they're following Jesus, and later on we see that they did the right thing. They left everything behind and were following him. So at this point, they might not be full of money and rich, But as I read it says, then who can be saved? And I think the point he's getting at here is not money. He's driving a point to them through this whole passage, which we'll see. It's rich in yourself. Are you rich in what you think you have in order to earn where you're going? And he's saying that all needs to be gone. Yeah. It has to leave. You have to get rid of all that. Because if you don't, you're not going to make it into the kingdom. And that's why it would be hard for a rich person. Because a rich person is relying upon themselves. Yeah. They see, I don't need anybody else. Because I have everything I need. I'm self-sufficient. And the self-sufficiency here is coming in the form of money. But he's also talking about in the form of what you perceive that you have in righteousness. And so now we come to this in the same passage, but it's a couple verses before. This immediately precedes the rich man, or the rich young man, as it says he was young. Then little children were brought to him in order that he may lay hands on them and pray. The disciples spoke sternly to those who brought them, but Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not stop them. For it is to such as these that the kingdom of heaven belongs." And there's a little boy, he's staring at it's hard to see in that picture, but it's a butterfly. I don't know what kind of butterfly it is. It might be a monarch because it's orange or black. But butterflies are pretty neat. And there's a little boy looking. And he has awe and wonder. You can see it in his eyes. He's just staring. I would be in wonder that the butterfly's sitting there still when I'm laying there looking at me, right? I mean, we used to have flower gardens between our house and garage. And we had bee balm, which attracts butterflies, but it also attracted hummingbirds. And sometimes I'd be standing there watering, and the hummingbirds would come right to the flowers. But first they would sit and stare at me to make sure I was okay, and then they would start going to the flowers. Even while I was watering, I thought it was an amazing thing. There's once there was this little tiny thing, and it looked like a hummingbird eating. And the closer I looked, and I finally went outside when I saw one a few days later, and it's a moth. And I looked it up, it's called hummingbird moth. They're small, but they hover, and they look like a hummingbird. But it's a moth. It's just amazing. And there's a wonder that you have when you see something like that. And you're just like, wow. You just look. You don't know anything about it. But it's an amazing sight. And it's something that you look at. Now, in most commentaries or study Bibles, they say that he brought the children out, that idea, because children in innocence are very trusting of the adult. But I looked at it and I thought of something different. It's a wonder that a child has when they see somebody or something, and they're just like, wow. And that's something that the Pharisees lost that they didn't have. Because you can't have wonder on something if you think you have all the answers. Paul said in Philippians 3:8 that everything that he thought he knew regarding being a Pharisee, high in status, following the law, following the traditions, all the feasts, everything, you build on that and you think you have it all figured out. But you don't. You get rid of it all for Christ. That's what he's saying, the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. That value is more than anything. He says, for his sake I have suffered the loss of all things. You think about someone who thinks that they've known the way all along, and the person's 100 years old, and they built their whole life on something, and complete devotion, and they think, this is it, I know it all. And then someone comes up and tells them, you don't. You have wasted.
Or a universal reconciliation, and then you get attacked.
Yeah. You have wasted your whole life. That would be what the person might not say it then, but that's what the person thinks.
Yeah.
Well, if you're right, then everything I've learned was for nothing. And I didn't need to know all that. And that's what Paul is saying there. Everything. It's gone. In Psalm 66, 4 and 5, it says, the whole earth falls to its knees, it worships you, sings to you, can't stop enjoying your name and fame. Take a good look at God's wonders, and they'll take your breath away. Now, there's not talking about creation as in wonders. In this particular, if you read the chapter, he's talking about everything that he did for Israel in bringing them along was something that was, it just filled them with wonder, or it should have, and it filled the world with wonder as far as what God was doing for them, the many things that he did for them. I found a few different quotes I looked at. I like to look at quotes when I'm studying about other people. Frequently I'll come upon something and it'll strike me, and I'll go to Google and I'll put quotes on whatever the topic is. And it's amazing. There's quotes for everything. Everything. And many quotes came up about wonder. And a man named Soren Kierkegaard, who I happen to know who he is, he believes, I'm pretty sure he believes in the salvation of all. But he's written a lot of books. He's a Christian man. He says, life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. When you experience something that's to you wonderful and awe-inspiring, it's really cool. It's neat. When you start to learn more about it and you start picking it apart, then all of a sudden the wonder starts to disappear. And it just becomes something that every day, oh, I already know about that. Oh, it's only like that because of the science behind it. There's I think I got this from my mom maybe a long time ago. Some website, you learn things and it teaches you things and then it gives you quizzes. It's called Brilliant. And sometimes, actually most of the time, I'm not really brilliant. I learn. There are times where they give you something that is seemingly so simple, and I just estimate it out. Could be geometry or anything like that. Making matchsticks, how many blocks do you get from it? And a few times, I'm right. And then I click the answer, and it says, you're brilliant. And it says, this many percent of people got this right. And sometimes I'm like, wow, only 50% of everybody, and I'm one of them? And then you start going through all the explanations that people type in of how they got to the answer, and you're like, wow. It is basically all mathematics mostly.
Yeah.
And I am terrible at math. And a couple times I've seen people type in, it's common sense. It only makes sense that that would be the answer. But all these other people are putting in logical, mathematical reasons why. And I'm one of the people that are like, well, it just makes sense. Now, most of the time when I think it just makes sense, it's not correct. Because there is something behind it. But it's amazing. And to me, that goes right along with this quote. It's not to be solved. It's just to be experienced. Years ago, we had a big power outage all across the Northeast. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.
Danny was still at home. He was younger. And I got all excited. So I'm like, there's not going to be any power, Danny. Tonight, when the sun goes down, we're going to go out and we're going to look in the sky and you're going to see what the sky really looks like. Full of stars. And of course, the power came back on before it got dark. So I was disappointed. But that's something of wonder. And that's what the picture is here. You see that. It's amazing. So it came to me that we spoke about the parable already. This kingdom is like the sower. He says the seed, and this is Jesus' explanation, the seed cast in the gravel. Now remember, the gravel is the path. It's right in the field. It's not like a road path, but in between the rows, because they actually walk between the rows and sow their seed. This person who hears it instantly responds with enthusiasm. But there is no soil of character. And so when the emotions wear off and some difficulty arrives, there is nothing to show for it. They lose the wonder. At first, it was like, wow. But they lost it. And I think they lost it here because of their, it says because of their character. There's no desire to keep up with it. But with some people, it's wow, and then once they start dissecting it and seeing all this, then the wow factor just goes away. And they lose it. Because it's become too much. They know too much about it. And they've picked it apart so much that everything about it is just, there's no more wonder. Another psalm says, far and wide they'll come to a stop. They'll stare in awe and wonder. Dawn and dusk take turns calling, come and worship. Again, it's like in Psalm 66, where it's the things he's done for Israel. It's amazing. Come and see. And they'll look at God in awe and wonder to worship him. And again, it's like a child. And I think these are the things that Jesus is driving at with the children. It's awe and wonder of what his kingdom is that draws. And if you don't have that awe and wonder like a child has, you're not going to be drawn. Right? You're not going to see it. We're going to see if this works. It might. A long time ago, I wanted to put a video in PowerPoint, and I couldn't figure it out. But I typed in last night, how do you do this? I did that before, and I was totally lost and confused. I think it's not going to work because we don't have the internet. Because on my pad, it won't work either. Because I don't. On my phone, it would probably work. So I'm sorry. But we'll just go with this picture. I told Lisa I put a picture up as my backup in case. So the reason that I did the video, that's the Northern Lights. I know I've used this. You might not remember. But I've used this illustration for other things. When I was in the Air Force, we did something called temporary duty assignments, and it was basically for the pilots mostly. The pilots would get to go places where they could go as fast as they want. There wasn't any limitations because they could break the sound barrier without breaking people's windows. Or there would be bombing ranges. And we went to a place called Cold Lake Air Force Base, and it's in the town of Cold Lake in Canada. 4 hours north of Edmonton. I don't know what province that's in, but it's way north. When we flew up, we flew in a cargo plane, which doesn't have a lot of windows, so I didn't see outside. But on the way back, frequently the Air Force charters airliners, because obviously, I'm guessing they don't have enough of their own planes in stock to transport us around. And on the way back, we flew back in a 747. My first time ever in a big plane like that. It was really cool. But we had windows. And the thing that struck me as we were flying back is, wow, there is nothing. Trees, and trees, and trees, and trees, and dotted in here and there, ponds and lakes and rivers. So it's really out in nowhere land. But one night, one of the guys that we were walking, I think from the store there, the PX, back to our dorm, and just something caught the one eye. I looked up. It was the Northern Lights. And it was incredible. They actually move. It weaves, it moves. That's why I had the video. I want you to see it. Again, when Danny was younger, years ago, we got in the news, it said, you'll be able to see the northern lights. And from here, that's pretty rare. And we saw, and it was just a glow. I was like, oh, that's not what I remember the northern lights look like. I mean, it's literally right above you.
Yeah.
And I just stood there. And I don't know how long I watched. It didn't happen the next night or the next, it just happened that one night. It was just incredible to watch and see. And that is what he's talking about. You see something beautiful and brilliant and you just look. But I imagine if you live there, after seeing it over and over and over again, and opening up a science book in school, I remember they taught us what it was. Particles from the sun, radiation coming down, and the ozone that protects us, or the magnetic sphere, they hit it, particles hit it, and of course chemically it causes light, and that's the beams coming down, the particles of radiation coming down that never make it to us. They don't make it, but because up in the north there's space in the magnetic sphere, the way it hits the earth, there's like a little area where it's not as strong, and so the beams come and you can see them. Those beams are hitting the earth all over the place, but you can't see it because the magnetic sphere is stronger, but you can see it up there. It was really neat. But when you start looking into why it does it, it kind of takes away from it a little bit. Because now, oh, I know what it is. I understand. That's really cool. It looks neat. And then you just go on. And I think that's what Jesus is talking about here when he's talking about childlike. So in Luke, he says, only the children are going to inherit. He doesn't even say it like Matthew does, like you have to be childlike. I think in Mark it says you have to be childlike. In Matthew, it's those that are like the children will inherit. In Mark, it's you have to be childlike. And in Luke, it's only the children or those people will inherit. Does everybody know who Wayne Dyer is?
No.
Yeah. I don't think he's Christian. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's not. He's one of those philosophy type people. And Lisa says, well, who is he? When we used to have cable, we don't have cable anymore, when we used to have it, on WSXI they had fun drives. And he was one of the people that they would play during the fun drives all the time. And he would just be a talk. If he'd be talking about something. It's not really motivational, but it's something about people and thinking and how we treat each other and all these things. And I used to love listening to him. It's some really neat stuff. But one of the things, this is a quote he has, it says, recapture the childlike feelings of wide-eyed excitement, spontaneous appreciation, cutting loose, and being full of awe and wonder at this magnificent universe. And I think in this talk, his point was, there's a lot in life to experience, but you have to leave behind everything that you perceive as why it is the way it is. If you don't do that, you're going to completely miss it. So, when Jesus is saying to them, it's the children, or the people that have the mind of a child, not immaturity, but the innocence, and you just see it, you're just like, wow. They're going to be the ones who appreciate it. Because when you don't, you're just going to miss it. I was trying to think of myself. At one point, as I looked at this kingdom thing, I looked at it as a border. You walk along, and you're really close to the border, and there's the kingdom, and here's the world. And sometimes you're walking in it, sometimes you're not. But it's not really a border, because he says that it's here. Remember, he tells them, I think it's in Luke, where he says, it's here, right now, among you. Of course, he's speaking of himself. But as far as a kingdom sense, it's there. So it's more like you're walking and it's all around you. And sometimes, if you see it and understand it and you're there, it's almost like you're going to disappear. Because you're not going to be rooted in the world been learning in the mornings. You'll see yourself as crucified to the world. I am somewhere else. And then sometimes you'll be more visible to the world because that's where you are. And so it's the awe and the wonder and the things that we know that he's teaching about the kingdom, of what it's like, because he's trying to get them to a point of understanding you can live right now in that sense of the kingdom of God and what he has. And everything he's saying so far, I think, leads to, it's really simple. And everything, the Pharisees, all this righteousness they have, you have to exceed it, not because you have to do more. You have to exceed it because you have to understand that it doesn't mean anything. That's what he means by exceed and by childlike. Amen? Does that make sense?
Amen.